Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today we're going to be using the stamp set by Honeybee Stamps called Silent Night. And we're going to be creating a very simple scene here. So I'm just taking one of the images from the stamp set. I'm going to be taking the deer, and this is enough to carry an entire card. I'm using my Misty here just because it is a large image, just in case I had to stamp it twice. And I'm going to be stamping this with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 onto a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm also going to be stamping this onto a piece of Simon Says stamp masking paper, just with that same ink there. And again, just using my Misty because I already have it lined up, just making it a little bit easier. And I'll go ahead and fussy cut out my mask. Once I had that done, I attempted to line up my mask, and I didn't bother to cut in between his legs just because I knew there wasn't going to be any ink blending there. But I didn't line it up great, and when I tried to pull it off, I tore off his head. So I was able to actually line it up a little bit easier by having the mask in 2 pieces rather than just one. So once that is lined up, I am taking a piece of Eclipse masking paper, and I'm just going to be cutting a wavy line here. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be wavy. You can definitely do a straight line here if you prefer. I'm going to mask off the bottom part of my card panel, and we're going to be doing some ink blending for the sky. And I'm going to be using Distress Oxides here in Tumbled Glass, Wilted Violet, and Shaded Lilac. So I'm going to start with the tumbled glass, and I'm going to start from the top of my panel and work my way down just to kind of get a base coat of my main color here. Then I'm just going to be adding a little bit of the Wilted Violet to the very top of my card panel. This looks extremely dark, but we will blend this out. I'm going to blend this out a little bit with the Shaded Lilac, and I'm going maybe about halfway down from my sky, and then I'll move back to my tumbled glass and blend the rest of that out. Next, I'll remove that Eclipse masking paper, and I'm just going to be cutting a pretty, no, first, sorry, I lied. I'm going to take the little tree from the stamp set and dark chocolate ink by Simon Says Stamp and just stamp a few trees in the background. Not worried about overlapping these at all. Now I'll remove the Eclipse masking paper, and I'm going to be cutting a curve here, but it's very subtle. It's almost straight. And I'm going to be doing ink blending now with Shaded Lilac regular distress ink. And I have barely any ink on my ink blending tool here, and I'm pretty much just going over the mask, just slightly going above it. So it's going to pretty much appear that you have no ink going on your paper at all. But once you remove your mask, you'll see those subtle lines that you've created. I'm just moving the mask around the bottom part of my card panel. I'm not re-inking my ink blending tool here. I'm just kind of going with whatever's on there. And I'm just randomly putting these in different areas. There's really no rhyme or reason for it. And this will just give the appearance that there's some hills of snow behind my deer. So once that was all done, I went ahead and removed my only mask. And I noticed that the one ear, the mask of the one ear there, must have come up when I was doing my ink blending, and I didn't even realize it. So I have some purple right on his ear, which would be hard to cover up. So I'm just going to take my sand eraser and lightly go over that area. I know I'm not going to take it up completely, but at least I'll be able to lighten it so that I can color directly over it. So next we'll move on to the Copic coloring, and I apologize, I zoomed in a lot more than I normally do here, so there's going to be times that we kind of lose focus a little bit. But like always, I am going in with my lightest color and mapping out my darkest areas. At first, I was going to go with a light source off to the left. Then as I looked at the entire image, it made more sense to have the light source to the right. So I switched that up and started laying out my darkest areas mainly to the left-hand side. So the darkest areas will be obviously to the left on his legs that are kind of behind the other legs. Where his head is turned to the right-hand side, that would cast a shadow, and underneath her little face, this is not a him, it's a her, Next, I'll go in with my darkest color, and I apologize, this is off screen, and I know we keep losing focus a little bit here. But this is the E37, and I'm pretty much just going over those same areas that we had mapped out. And you'll see that I'm doing very little flicking here, and pretty much for the whole image, I didn't do much flicking at all. I'm pretty much just putting lines. So making a shadow or creating a shadow where the one leg is behind another along the left-hand side of her neck, and a little bit on the right side of her neck as well, being she is facing towards the right. I will add some more darker areas with my darkest midtone. This is just the very, very darkest areas that I'm creating with this color. So next we'll move on to the E33, and I'm going to be extending these areas out a little bit further. And again, not doing much flicking at all. I'm pretty much just thickening up those lines that we had created with the E37 and maybe extending those out in certain areas. On her back, right above where her belly is, I just extended that line out a little bit further, as well as thickening up that line as well. For her neck, I'm going to do the same thing, and you'll see I added a little bit of darkness between her ears, and that was mainly to cover up my ink blending error. It was darker than what I intended, but it did at least cover it up. And I did extend that shadow along the right side of her neck a little bit down her back with that E33. Next, for the E31, I'm doing the same thing as I did with the E33, just making those lines even thicker and extending out some of those darker areas a little bit further. There's going to be just a very small highlight on her neck. This is not going to have much of a highlight at all. For her face, that's going to be what the light would catch the most. So that would be the one area that has quite a bit of the highlight color. So we'll move on to the E30, or back to the E30, and I'm just going to blend all of this out. Now here I will start some flicking just to make my blending a little bit easier, especially on her back and on her face. Those are the areas that I have the most highlight on. Now for her little chest and her belly, these areas would be white, but I didn't want to leave them white. They still would have a shadow. So I'm going to be using some C markers here just to create the shadows. First, I went in with her nose and her little hooves there, and I didn't do any shading here. I'm just going to go in with the E59 and just color these in solid. So again, for her chest and her belly, I'm going to be using a C3 and a C1, and I'm just going to go along the left-hand side of her little chest and just pretty much go along the lines of the stamped image itself, and then just add a little bit of shading on her belly off to the left again. Then flick that out with the C1, and I'm basically flicking this off to white. I am still leaving quite a bit of white space. In order to get rid of those flick lines, I go in with my colorless blender from the opposite direction and just very quickly flick that from the opposite direction to get rid of some of those flick lines, but you can certainly leave them. It does give you kind of some texture. Next, I went in with a white gel pen and just filled in the spots on her back. And for the little bird, I knew I wanted to color the bird red, but I initially colored the wings and the tail red with just two colors. This is a teeny tiny image, and I had colored her little belly, or his little belly, like a beige color. Later on, I ended up fixing this because I didn't really care for it, but I just colored the beak just one color. This is really just a dot of color. Once all of my coloring was complete, there is another stamp in the stamp set that is snow, falling snow. So I'm going to bring back out my Misty, and I'm going to be using Unicorn White Pigment ink by Hero Arts, and I'm just going to stamp this in the background. Now this will be pretty subtle, but it does give some interest to the background. I didn't do any spatter in the background or anything like this because I knew I was going to be adding the snow. this is where I decided that I wanted to color the rest of the bird in red. I'm using the sentiment from the Rejoice stamp set, and this is just the Noel. And as I was kind of trying to figure out where I wanted to place my sentiment, I realized that that bird just wasn't looking right. Her little belly was blending in with the deer. So I ended up coloring the rest in with those same two reds that we had used previously. And then finally, I stamped my sentiment on the top of the card panel right there in the middle with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Adhered this to an A2 size card base. And that is the first card for my 25-day card series for Christmas. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.